It's quiet tonight. The last time we filmed, there was so much noise. The traffic was going up and down. It's really quiet tonight.
Okay, all set.
Just want to see what I started. I guess we're ready.
I see you didn't have to use your new pad tonight.
No, I limited
Don't
myself.
read without the box of some of those
Markers.
markers.
Yeah, I hope I can present this in some kind of intelligent format here, because it's a tremendous amount of information, and to analyze it in 3 days and get it summarized is a little bit much. So I'll do my best with it. And I hope I can get the meeting across there. And people aren't seated yet. Can we wait till they're seated?
Sure.
Wait, hold it. Ribbon, hold it. Kyle? What? Remember what I said?
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming this evening. This evening I would like to present some information to you that is very, very new. It was given to me about 3 days ago, and in order for me to convey to you the importance of the message that was given to me, I need to take you through some history on certain things that have appeared now and then in our mythological stories and things that have emerged within our history that nobody really knew if they were real or not or what they represented. I was given information recently that made sense of a lot of things for me, and I'm hoping that by the end of this presentation I can get that meaning across to you, at least in a small way, so you can understand the significance of the information that has been given. Okay, in the last class we got into a little bit about the very early history of our lineage, and that no, we didn't come out of apes, that we had started our evolution on a planet called Terra about 560 million years ago, and Terra was located in something called Harmonic Universe 2. So we'll pick up from there in this class, and then through the course of our discussion tonight, I'll bring you up to the present time and the new information that was given to me that directly affects what is happening on our planet right now. Okay, just for a quick recap, this is a very quick diagram of a 15-dimensional matrix. All right, have dimensions 1 through 3, 4 through 5, 4, 5, and 6 actually, 7, 8, and 9, 10 through 12, and 13 through 15. All right, the only thing we need to know for this discussion this evening is that each group of 3 dimensions creates something called a harmonic universe, and reality fields take place within that harmonic universe. Now, right now, our Earth is positioned in what is called harmonic universe 1. It's composed of the frequency patterns of dimensions 1, 2, and 3. When we speak of our origins as beginning on Terra, all those many years ago, we're talking about harmonic universe 2, which is the reality field that takes place in dimensions 4, 5, and 6. It's a higher vibrating universe than what we're in right now. What we are going to get into tonight is what our relationship is to that planet Terra that's in the second harmonic universe, and how our planet Earth ended up down here in the first place. For we need to understand those things if we are going to understand the significance of certain other material. The material this will lead into tonight is called simply the Secrets of Amenti. The Secrets of Amenti go way back through our history, through the Egyptian period, but even further back than that. And many people at different times were aware of something called the Halls of Amenti, but very few people knew what they were or what they represented. They just knew they were very secret, and they were guarded within the metaphysical traditions of many different philosophies, but nobody knew what they were or why they were important. In understanding our relationship between Terra and Earth, we'll be able to begin to understand what the Halls of Amenti represent. And in order to understand the significance of the information I was just given, it is going to be important to know what Amenti represents. Now, I will let the cat out of the bag in the beginning of the discussion, and then I will lead you back through a trail of why this is important and what it means to us today. I was told several days ago that something called the Ark of the Covenant had sparked. And I said, what is that? And what does that mean? Because my communicators seemed very, very excited about this. And it meant nothing to me on a conscious level. So I asked them to explain it to me, and they did. They put a whole new chapter in my book and explained to me things that some ancient part of me knew, but I didn't know. So we're dealing with a reality today of something called the Ark of the Covenant, whatever that is, having sparked, whatever that means. By the end of this discussion, we should be able to understand what that means and the significance it will have to us today. Quick run on history here. We covered a little bit of this before in the last class, but I'll just start there and work our way up. About 560 million years ago, on the planet Terra, the second harmonic universe, a race called the Taurniciums were seeded by a large group of intergalactic beings from the harmonic 2 universe and also from the higher harmonic universes. There are 5. The beings that are in harmonic universes 3 and up are not in physical form anymore. They're evolved consciousness that are in pure energy form. So these beings from the higher harmonic universes motivated some of the beings within harmonic universe 2 who do have some form of physicality to create an experiment together in which a new race strain could be created. This race strain was very special because it was intended to be able to hold the whole energy pattern of an oversoul, not just a soul. So the Taurnicium strain were created to be guardians of the planet Terra, and they were created, biologically speaking, in a way that would allow them to hold much more energy than most other races could. So all these races contributed their genetic imprint to the Taurnicium strain. Okay, they evolved for quite a while on Terra. They were originally seeded, and this is right into our mythology here, our Christian story. They were seeded into a place. It was a continent that was called Eden. E/D-E-N. It was not Eden, it was Eden. That was the name of a continent that was on Terra at this time. So the race was seeded in there, and that's where our stories of the Garden of Eden come from. That's the garden they were referring to. It was on Terra. All right. Now, the Terran races evolved for about 8 million years, doing quite well. There were 12 sub-races within the racial strain, and they all carried the 12-strand DNA package. They were gods compared to us. They didn't reproduce like we do. They reproduced by fission or budding, where they could just replicate by combining energy fields. It was an awesome type of existence to be a Taurnicium. They didn't die. They didn't have to. If their consciousness became bored with being in a body, they would simply demanifest it and leave. Okay. About 8 million years after they had evolved into very, very sophisticated cultures on Terra, there were interactions from other stellar groups from Harmonic Universe 2. They would visit, and they had an open stellar community, just like we have a lot of cities where lots of people pass through. Well, lots of intergalactic communities would pass through Terra at that time. By 8 million years ago, they started to digress because their gene codes got mixed with the gene codes of some of the other star people that they weren't originally intended to blend with. And because of the digression that occurred, certain separations occurred between, not only within the genetic code, but also between the belief systems of the people. And 2 primary groups began to faction out of the Taurniciums. One were called the Elanians, and the other were called the Lumians. And they both coexisted on the continent of Eden, creating a culture called Elania and Lumia. The Elanians became, because of their more exaggerated intermixing with stellar groups, became much more aggressive than the Lumians. And they began to dominate the Lumians and make it very uncomfortable for them to be there. They also began to use technologies that were drawing energy from the core of Terra and using it in ways that was not in harmony with planetary physics. The Lumians were aware of this, and they knew it, and they knew something bad was going to come out of it, but the Elanians wouldn't listen, and they didn't, they just wanted to dominate the Lumian culture, and that was it. Okay. Because there was so much tension being created on Terra between these 2 groups, the Lumians asked something called the Sirian Council, which was from the star system Sirius. There's a star system Sirius in Harmonic Universe too, just like we have a star system Sirius. It's like its twin reflection in the higher dimensional field. The Sirian councils had been one of the original overseers of the Turandisium experiment because they had contributed a lot of genetic makeup to our experiment. So we are related to the Sirian cultures through our original gene codes. They asked the Sirian councils to help them with this problem that they were having with the Elanians. What could they do about this? And the council intervened and got involved with a group called the Elohim, which appear in our biblical stories. The Elohim were actually a group that were from Harmonic Universe 3, a higher Harmonic Universe. They were not physical. They were not even as physical as the Turandisiums. And they had been created by Lyran groups that were founders of a lot of the civilizations down here. So the Sirian Council and the Elohim got involved with the Lemanians or the Lumians that were having a problem with the Elanians on the continent of Eden. What came out of that was something called the Covenant of Pleiador, and the formation of a group called the Pleiadorians. The Pleiadorians started out as the Sirian Council giving permission and assistance to the Lumian people so they could move most of their race to a smaller continent that existed on Terra at that time, but it was not in a highly civilized state of being. There were beings on it, but they weren't highly civilized. So through the Sirian Council and the Elohim, the Lumians were given a way to get away from the Elanians and evolve in their own. They moved most of their people across the seas, and they took them to this new continent, and they named that continent Mu, and that's where our legends of Mu come from. They were not from Earth, they were from Terra, all right? There were other series of events that paralleled the Atlantean and Lemurian dramas that did occur on Earth, but Mu was on Terra, and that was that level of that part of our history. It came from Terra. Okay, so for quite a while, the Lumians evolved on Mu. They created something called the Council of Mu and set up their own governmental structures and all that kind of thing. They also set up something called the Priesthood of Mu, which was, priests were male or female. They didn't make a gender distinction. But they were very focused on adhering to and teaching of the sacred law of one, which was unity consciousness, the understanding that we all come from the same source and that we're all related and have to work in harmony. So these things were set up, and they evolved for quite a while. But there was a problem with some of the strains, just like a lot of the Elanians had mixed with the interstellar groups, so had the Lumians. So they didn't have a pure 12-strand DNA code anymore, and it was continuing to digress. So the Elohim and some other groups got involved, and they interbred with them, and they created a race called the Saras. The Saras basically purified the Lumian genetic code, so that race could continue to evolve rather than digress. Well, okay. At a certain point in the evolution of the people on Mu, there were things called the Syrian Rebellion broke out, and this broke out in Elania. The Elanians were run by something called the Templar Solar Initiates. They were a group of spiritual and political beings that were appointed originally by the Sirian Council to run things in Elania. Well, they decided to side with Syrian Anunnaki groups, which were a seed Syrian race, and the Syrian Anunnaki were rebelling against the Sirian Council, and they were trying to take over their own Sirius planetary system. The Templar Solar Initiates from Elania got involved with this and decided they would rebel against the Sirian Council too, and they would use power any way they wanted to. So the Syrian Rebellion broke out, and great hostilities broke out between the people of Mu and the people of Elania, because the Templar Solar Initiates wanted to take Mu and put it under their dominion. So there was many years of, I think there was about 40 or 50,000 years worth of this constant battle and push-pull between these two races. Finally, at one point, the Lumians were able to see, and the Saras were able to see, that there was going to be a catastrophe that happened in the future because of the way the Elanians were using power from the Earth core. And they tried and made petitions to try to convince them to stop this. They tried to get the Sirian Council involved to stop it, but nobody could stop them. They were going to do what they wanted to anyway. Knowing this was going to occur, knowing that there was going to be a major explosion in the planetary grid that would very possibly wipe out all of them. They had to form another plan of what they could do. So the Lumians and the Saras and the Elohim and the Syrian Council and a number of other ET races that were sympathetic to this cause, including the Pleiadians from Harmonic Universe 2, got involved in something called the Covenant of Pleiador. This was a rescue mission that was designed before a rescue needed to be. They knew the event was going to occur, so they devised, before the event occurred on Terra, they devised a plan by which the souls that were lost, the people who were killed in this explosion of the grid, whose vibrational rate would fall and their soul essence would fragment into pieces all over the place down in the Harmonic Universe 1, they knew this would happen. And they knew they would have to be able to bring those souls back up, or they would be stuck in Harmonic Universe 1 from now until eternity. So that was part of the reason why they formed the Covenant of Pleiador, was to allow those souls that got trapped in time in the first Harmonic Universe following the explosion on Terra to evolve. But there was also another reason for the formation of it, and it gets into the physics of planetary grid structures. If you have a planet that is in, say, Harmonic 2, and part of that grid blows off, what that means is part of the morphogenetic field, the form-holding pattern for that planet, has been ripped away. In the case of Terra, the parts of the morphogenetic field that got ripped away ended up in Harmonic 1 universe. Once they emerged there, they separated into 12 different pieces and began to pull energy to them. It's a process called accretion, and they formed planetary bodies. They formed their own little solar system down in Harmonic 1 universe. But that left Terra without a portion of its morphogenetic field. Now, I won't get too much into the structure of how the harmonic universes relate to each other, but basically, upon entering the 15-dimensional matrix, what is created at the same time will be a morphogenetic field for whole planetary systems in the higher dimensions, and then from dimension 7 down, in the 3 harmonic universes, you will have one version of the planet in the 3rd harmonic universe, another version of it in the 2nd harmonic universe, and another in the 1st harmonic universe. So there's an evolutionary process that takes place here as planets ascend. It's dimensional ascension, and what it means is pulling in frequency into the grid pattern, and a grid pattern is made of chelons, which we talked about before. So anyway, when Terra did finally explode 550 million years ago, and a part of it was blown off, and a part of its morph field was lost, it could not evolve. It was stuck in the tracks of time within Harmonic Universe 2, until the time when it could reassemble those parts of its grid. It had to pull back in the portions of the morphogenetic field that had been lost in the explosion, or it would be stuck in time and it just would not evolve. There are many planets this has happened to, where they're literally stuck. They're called non-ascension planets, where they just stay there, and eventually, I think eventually they implode. I'm not really sure about the physics on that, but there's a process here. An ascension planet is a planet that still has its original energy connection to its morphogenetic field in the higher dimensions, which allows it to be able to ascend. So Terra was an ascension planet until the explosion happened. When the grid exploded and the energies ended up down in Harmonic Universe 1, this plan of rescue, not just for the people, but for the fragments of the morphogenetic field of Terra, had to be set in motion if any of them were going to be able to evolve. The Terrans needed us to evolve in order for them to evolve. So it was a very, very sacred covenant. It was assisted by beings from the highest levels, including the ones up in the dimension 15. There are entity beings up there. They assisted. A group called the Brunel assisted in this process. Also a group from the galactic core, which is about as high as you can go before you return to source. It's out of the dimensionalized system. A group called the Raw Confederacy also helped set up this plan. So a rescue plan was made, and that was titled the Covenant of Pleiador. The Pleiadorians were the beings involved with fulfilling this rescue mission and this contract. Okay. Now, part of the process of the Covenant of Pleiador required the seeding, or the reseeding, of the morphogenetic field for the Turanicium race back onto Earth. So after the implosion occurred, they did a number of things that will be discussed in the book that are really too sophisticated for me to get into right now. I don't think I could off the top of my head. But it basically broke down into several stages of evolution. We started out coming here as a group of Pleiadorians, but we did not come here as Pleiadorians in body. We came here in energy essence. The Pleiadorians did something very interesting with the help of the ones from the Metagalactic Core. They were able to transmute the cellular codes in their body, turn themselves into a field of light, and then merge their energy together. And by doing that, they created a morphogenetic field that was composed of all their consciousness. This morphogenetic field became known as something called the sphere of Amenti. And what it did was hold the whole imprint for the evolution of the Turanicium race. What had to be done with the sphere of Amenti was it had to be placed down into the Earth grid, in the second dimension in Earth, and attached to the morphogenetic field piece that got ripped off from Terra when it blew. Because each of our planets ended up with a piece of that morph field. This new morph field, sphere of Amenti, had to be put in to the Earth core, and that would allow the souls who were part of that sphere to begin manifesting themselves into the lower harmonic universe 1. They were doing this as a favor to the souls who got blown apart in the implosion. What they would do was they would literally grow them bodies that they could attach to, so they didn't have to be lost in the elemental kingdoms from now until Kingdom Come. So with the Pleiadorians forming the sphere of Amenti and then beginning to birth themselves onto planet Earth, they allowed for the soul fragments of the others to accrete or pull in to their body pattern and evolve, merge consciousness and evolve. They allowed them to re-evolve. So that was the plan. There were a number of stages to it, and it was a great plan if there wasn't a lot of things that happened in the meantime to hang up the plan where it had to be redone over and over and over again. Okay. Stage 1 began on Earth about 250 million years ago. And it went up to 25 million years ago. I got a 5 there. Okay. The first phase in this was 5 cloistered races were formed. All right, the morphogenetic field that was composed of the Pleiadorians broke into 5 pieces. And out of those 5 pieces, the energetic pattern, the imprint in energy, was formed for 5 different races that were like smaller parts of what the Pleiadorian Turanicium 1 imprint was. So they broke them down into 5 what they called cloistered races. The cloistered races carried among all of them together the whole 12-strand DNA package. So by evolving through each of those, souls could be pulled in and evolve into the cloistered races and then ascend by assembling through a couple of incarnations. They could assemble their DNA package and return back to Terra. And this was the first step in the plan. And what's interesting was because of the way that universal physics works, which I can't go into now because I probably couldn't explain it, they needed to be seated not on Earth first. They needed to be seated on Earth's anti-particle double. So the first stage of the race re-evolution plan were 5 cloistered races representing one of each of the different skin colors that became our skin colors here, were seated on parallel Earth. And they evolved there for a very long time. They evolved there between 250 million and 25 million years ago. That's a very long time to evolve. And they did well, and many souls ascended through them being there. The next stage in the plan started around 25 million years ago and took place between 25 and 20 million years ago. The first 2, what they call root races, were seated. And they were seated on the 7th dimensional version of our planet, which was Gaia. They were more etheric in nature. They didn't have physicality like we do. They were kind of like a ghost. If we looked at them, they would look like ghosts. But they were highly evolved, and they did something very special for us. Each one of the 2 first root races was responsible for bringing into the morphogenetic field 1/2 of the patterns, or the frequency patterns, for the first dimension, which was the first harmonic universe way down there. They grounded the morphogenetic field into matter in the first harmonic universe. So through their evolution, the first strand of DNA was put together and added into the morphogenetic field. whereby the next strand could be built by the next group of races. Okay. And there's a very strong correlation between DNA strands and dimensions that I may get into this time or not, but it will be in the book. You know, it's kind of complicated to try to explain it. Okay. So the two etheric races evolved on Gaia. The next stage, stage 3, began about 25 million years ago, around the same time that this was. It was something called the Halls of Amenti. And this was a very closely guarded secret for many, many years, especially in ancient Egyptian times, because they knew what it was. Okay? Along with the Halls of Amenti, there was something called the Staff of Amenti. Now, I'll try to explain what the Halls of Amenti are. If we remember, we called the Sphere of Amenti, that was the name we gave to the morphogenetic pattern that was set by the Pleiadians and put into the Earth core, which gave consciousness from the Pleiadians the ability to manifest through the Earth core and into manifestation on the Earth planet. Well, not only did the Sphere of Amenti set the pattern for the races, it also created a connection between our planetary core in D2, second dimension, and the planetary core in Terra in D5. Within the Sphere of Amenti, the next phase of the seeding of the races involved opening the sphere and creating a portal bridge between D2 and D5 and opening it. That would allow passage between the Earth core and the pre-cataclysmic time frame in Terra, the time before it blew up, because this is when this whole experiment started. They did it before it blew. So they had a time coordinate link up between the Earth's core and that past of the Terran time cycle. This became important later because it was a way to link Terra's past to Terra's future and link back the time cycle to put it back together. All right, now the Halls of Amenti didn't involve just one portal structure. That was the first one to be set. Then there was one portal structure set for each dimension of 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So in the Halls of Amenti, the halls represented 6 portals altogether. The 6 portals, one of the main one was the one that connected Earth core to pre-cataclysmic Terra, and the other 5 connected into each dimension, which meant, now dimensions work like time frames. Okay, if you're in D2, that means you're in a specific space-time location within the time matrix. So what the Halls of Amenti did was create a time portal structure between each of the different various times in dimensions 2 up through 6, where those portals could open into the main portal, beings could evolve back and forth through them, and it would eventually link the past and the past and future of Terra, so the time cycle could be restored. And through this process, the Earth grid would be able to emerge back into Terra. And all of the planets in our solar system are also attached to this whole process. Okay, so the main thing with the Halls of Amenti were they were the literal portals that beings needed to pass through. Once they got here, the souls here had to pass through the Halls of Amenti to get out of here. If you were a person who wanted to ascend back to God, you had to go through the Halls of Amenti. There was no other way to leave the first harmonic universe. So the Halls of Amenti were very important because they held our promise of ascension, not only to what we used to be as Turnicians, but beyond that. We couldn't evolve, if we couldn't evolve back to our original morph field, we couldn't evolve beyond it. So the Halls of Amenti were set. Then there was something that was called the Staff of Amenti that was created. The Staff of Amenti was a portion of the whole morphogenetic field that was stored in Terra. Now, a planet stores its morph field in its core. Okay, Terra had what was remaining from its morph field in D5. Because of some of the pole reversals and very intense things that happened after the explosion there, Terra could no longer hold the energy field of its morph field inside of itself. It would have imploded. It had to be removed. And the Elohim and the much higher councils became involved in this. And they literally took a piece of Terra's morph field. They took the whole thing out, broke it into 12 pieces, and put one piece of each of that morph field into the morphogenetic fields at the cores of all of the planets, the 12 planets down here. So they linked the ones that blew up back into that one by putting the original morph field back in to the smaller pieces. And eventually they would all evolve back up together into Terra, and meanwhile Terra draws energy from them, or it wouldn't be able to hold its form. Okay? So the staff of Amenti is something that's called a blue flame. It represents the frequency patterns of our portion of Terra's morphogenetic field. It is our connection to the be able to hold its form. Okay? So the staff of Amenti is something that's called a blue flame. It represents the frequency patterns of our portion of Terra's morphogenetic field. It is our connection to the divine and to Terra, and each one of the planets here has been entrusted with one of these pieces, one of these flames. They call it a blue flame because if you could see it, which you can at certain times, particularly from the D4 level of perception, it looks like a standing wave pattern, and it's about that high. Very small little thing, but very powerful. It's D5 frequency, fifth dimensional frequencies, in just a wave pattern that slowly moves back and forth. If it's activated, sometimes it moves fast, but it's an extremely intense energy field. And that became known as the staff of Amenti. It became known as the staff of Amenti because at certain points, much, much later in the evolution of our cultures down here, certain of the Elohim and other groups taught the Egyptian cultures and a couple other ones how to literally bring energy out of that blue flame and put it in an object here to make a power object. And the energy of the blue flame was attached to something called the staff in Egypt. Okay, in the Bible it was referred to as the rod and the staff. Well, this was the staff out of the rod and the staff. The rod actually held the flame morphogenetic pattern from D2, Earth's part of it. So between the two of them, they made a very powerful force. When the evolving races were taught how to embody those things within a gold object, and it had to be gold, that was the only element that could hold it, that could hold that kind of energy, they had the power to open certain portals. They also had the power to open the portals to the underworld, which was not a good thing. I won't get too much into what happened with all that, because a lot of things happened in the Egypt period where they were opening portals that they shouldn't have, and they almost blew the whole Pleiadorian project. But the most important thing to know is that the halls of Amenti represent a time warp portal system that create wormholes that go between various points of time in our Earth into various points in time in post and pre-cataclysmic Terra. And it's through those, they are the ascension chambers. That is how souls, whether they live in a body that can live forever here, if they ever want to get out of here, they have to pass through these because we are part of the morphogenetic field of the planet. Every being on the planet is part of that. We have to move through that morphogenetic field in order to get any place else out of this field of reality. And then it's important to know that the staff of Amenti was a very, very sacred object that was a blue flame of great, great power. And it held knowledge, not just power. Because energy is conscious. And that means it has consciousness like we do. It has the ability not to think in terms like we do. It has the ability to know, to cognate. So when you move, there are ways you can move your own mental energy field into this blue flame once you know it exists and know what it is. You can draw energy from it, but you can draw information from it as well, because it's full of information. Our whole species' history is contained in there, as well as Terra's history. All right? So these two objects are important because of the current events that are taking place now on the planet. I may skip over some of this. I'm just trying to get you a basic idea of what was happening and why it's important. Okay, stage 5 of the rescue mission of, rescuing the souls from Harmonic Universe 1 mission took place between 25 million years ago and about 5.5 million years ago. This was called the first seeding, and it referred to the physical races, the races who had built up enough matter density where when they manifested they would become physical. All right, about 18 million years ago, the 5 cloistered races were seeded on this Earth. Remember before they were seeded on the parallel Earth to begin downloading the DNA pattern into the Moore field? Well, 18 million years ago, they were all seeded here out of the Moore field. And again, they were seeded through a process called budding, which is fission replication of energy. Okay. After the 5 cloistered races here, now the cloistered races carried the strands of DNA that corresponded with dimensions 7 through 12. Okay, they were considered the ascension strands. We had a 12-strand DNA package here, and I might as well plug this in now. Plug it in. Okay. Yeah. Each strand of the 12-strand DNA corresponded to one of the dimensional fields. And the human body was originally designed to hold 12-dimensional fields, which means we wouldn't be locked into matter at all. We'd have bodies that wouldn't die. We could move our consciousness and our bodies wherever we wanted to. So there's a correlation between our strands and what's coded in our DNA and the dimensional fields that we're talking about. The DNA is literally composed of minute frequency patterns of each level of those dimensions. And one of each strand corresponded to each one of those 12 dimensions in our imprint. There were 3 dimensions, because remember we have 15 dimensions, 3 that weren't in our genetic code at all, that the body just could not hold. Alright, so just understanding that will help to understand the relationship now between something called the cloistered races and the root races. Okay? When the first seeding took place, it was going to be orchestrated in this way. First, the 5 cloistered races would come. The 5 cloistered races would also later appear with something called a root race. The root race would carry within its base DNA pattern the patternings for one of the strands of DNA. And through moving through that race, that particular race, and later it became incarnation, but it wasn't at first. We just descended. We could live for 1,000 years until we pulled in all the frequency patterns of the dimension that corresponded to the DNA strand that our race was working on. We pull that all in. It's called assembling the DNA strand. Once the full strand was assembled, it allowed the physical being and the consciousness to plug into the morphogenetic field of its cloister, which held strands 7 through 12, which once they plugged in, it would allow the strand that you had just built to merge with its double from the parallel universe, the particle and antiparticle, and it would create a burst of energy within the morphogenetic field that would plug you in to strands 7 through 12 and move you from harmonic universe 1 into harmonic universe 2. It would speed up the pulsation rate of your particles, turn part of them back into the morph field, and de-densify the body into the next level of less density than here. So there's a process involved here with DNA and pulling in frequency from the dimensions. And each of the 5 root races that were created after the first two created the base strand 1. They took care of D1 for us, okay? We still had dimension 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 before we'd have the full dimensional frequency patterns that would represent harmonic universe 2. So each of the root races were assigned one strand of DNA. The third root race was working on building DNA strand 2. The 4th root race was working on strand 3. The 5th root race, which is us, was working on strand 4. And the 5th or 6th was working on 5, and the 7th was working on 6. So there's a whole process here about evolving through the root races to build one particular strand of DNA. Originally, the plan was once that was done in one incarnation, you'd be able to plug in to the cloister, start to move that part of the morph field through you, and that would transmute you out of here. But they altered our genetic codes along the way for various different reasons. And we can't do that anymore, and that's where death was born. When the soul could no longer pull into the one genetic code all of the frequencies it needed to ascend out of here. So the races began in the first seeding to be entered. First, 18 million years ago, the 5 cloistered races, the ones who carried strands 7 through 12, as well as the strand of their root race. So each root race came in with the cloister race, and the root race had just the one strand to build. The cloister race had the one strand that would plug into the root race, and then it had strands 7 through 12. So there's a process of plugging them in here by pulling the patterns into your body from the morph field. That later became our incarnational pattern. About 15 million years ago, the 3rd root race came into being, and they were the Lumians. They were descendants, of course, of the Terran Lumians. And about 9 million years ago, the Elanians came in, and they were working on strands 2 and 3, those two. Now, the cloistered race that went with the Lumians were called the Urantrians. And there's some books here about Urantra that are referring to these cloistered races. And they talk about other planets and moving to another planet. They're talking about moving back to Terra. All right. In root race 4, the Elanians had a cloister called the Brenoe. Okay, so at least now we've established a basic pattern of how DNA was related to the root races, and how a root race would have a cloister race to go with it. And the cloister race was very special because it held its ascension gene codes. All right. All right. About 5,509,000 years ago.
Jeez.
Yeah, one time ago. Okay. Something happened called the Electric Wars. Okay, there were some of the Anunnaki, the Syrian ones that were rebelling against the Syrian Council, from Harmonic Universe 2, got involved with a group of entities that didn't like the idea of the Turanicium experiment. There was a lot of beings that held a grudge against the Turaniciums for what they did, for blowing Terra apart like that. Why do we want them back? You know, it's like, they did that once, forget it, leave them gone. You know? Well, the Elohim and the Pleiadorians, of course, were on our side. They wanted the Turanicium strain to be able to evolve again. They wanted the pieces of Terra to come back again. So there was a war fought called the Electric Wars that didn't just involve beings perhaps in spaceships. This was bigger than that. These were wars that were fought between the beings of Harmonic 3 and up. They were electric wars. They were called that because they were literally electrical entities that came down and were throwing energy all over the place. They almost blew the planet up doing it. So you're talking like entity wars here. And the entity wars were done over whether or not the Covenant of Pleiador would be allowed to be fulfilled. And fortunately, because some of the very much higher ups got involved, the Earth territory and the Pleiadorian contract was upheld, and the Anunnaki lost. But something happened during this time. You have a lot of big entities coming down into Harmonic 1 and throwing energy all over a planet. It's definitely going to affect the planet. Okay? It created some major problems in the planetary grid that they didn't know of immediately. It took them a while to figure out that the grid had been damaged very badly, and the portal system on Earth had been damaged very badly. They started to notice that the halls of Amenti, the portals were not working properly. They were not stable, and they were like throwing you into other time frames and stuff, so something was wrong. What basically had happened were there were rips made in the energetic bodies of the planet that allowed chaotic energies to just, spew all over the place. And the grid speed began to drop, because just like your finger, if you let your finger bleed long enough, all your blood will come out, Well, if you leave a piece of the grid blown apart long enough, all the energy is going to leak out and its vibrational rate is going to drop. That is what happened. And the Earth's speed dropped to the point where it could no longer hold within its core the sphere of Amenti. Just like the problem that had happened on Terra, it couldn't hold the morph field anymore or it would have imploded. The morph would have pulled it right back in. So they had to take the sphere of Amenti out of the Earth core. And they called this the seal of Amenti, because what happened when this occurred was the halls of Amenti were sealed. And because there is a total connection, energetically speaking, between the morphogenetic field of the planetary core and every piece of DNA that walks around on the planet, because certain things were taken out of the sphere of Amenti, certain codes were taken out to be able to remove it, certain things would not manifest in the DNA anymore. So we couldn't plug in the strands as our root races were supposed to. And it started creating this real big genetic problem that resulted in us not being able to stay in one body, pull in all the frequencies and ascend. All of a sudden we could only pull in so many frequencies, and then the body couldn't hold anymore in the genetic code. So this is when reincarnation came into being, where we would have to drop the body and then move into another one that vibrated a little bit higher through the morph field and back in. So because of the damage done during the electric wars, this problem was created that became our major problem. And it became a genetic problem because it was done through the morphogenetic field at the center of the planet. And what also happened was when you take a morphogenetic field out of a planetary grid, you're taking part of its memory bank. That's part of its cellular memory. So the beings that would come in to Earth after the sphere had been removed, they'd still have to pass through it. And it was put someplace else. It was put in storage in another system. They would have to pass through it, but once they got here, the veils had come down. They wouldn't remember where they came from. They wouldn't remember their connection to the Earth, to each other, or to anything else except their present moment time. They lost their history. And during the Electric Wars, most of the beings were killed or they were migrated to other planets in this harmonic universe. This is where we got a lot of ET gene codes mixed up with our gene codes, because they literally let us go onto their planets before, because we wouldn't have lived through the Electric Wars. But, okay, let's see where am I? Reorganize here where I'm going. Okay. So anyway, during this period of time, 5,508,100 years ago, the seal of Amenti came into being. And the sphere of Amenti was removed, taken out of our planet, and the portions of our gene code that were connected to that sphere, certain portions of them were taken out, which gave us the type of consciousness that we have now. Okay, right after that, they said it was only about 4 years after the sphere of Amenti was taken out, there was a slight pole reversal, not a full one, but a slight one, and it created a very quick freeze. There was an ice age type thing that happened very, very quickly, about 5,504,000 years ago, they said. So the sphere of Amenti was taken out, and like I said, I'm just doing an overview here. If you want the full story, you're going to have to read it in the book, because it's hard to put this much history into a presentation, especially only 3 days after you learned it. Okay. Now, there's something else that occurred, which was called the Seal of Pleiador. At a certain point in time, and I won't get into why it happened, but at a certain point in time, the sphere of Amenti was not only removed from the planet core and kept in D3, it was taken into the fourth dimension and put in a storage area for certain reasons that had to do with other ET tamperings and trying to destroy the sphere. When that happened, the sphere acquired what they call a fourth dimensional seal, which meant beings that didn't have the frequency codes of D4 within their DNA would not be able to go back into their morphogenetic field. They would be stuck within the lower dimensions that they resonated with. And because of the thing that already happened with the seal of Amenti, they couldn't plug in their fourth dimensional codes. So what this resulted in was when a being would die, it would come into an incarnation from the morph field. It could come down, it would come into the incarnation and live its incarnation. The body would start to deteriorate. It would leave. Well, normally it would go back to the morphogenetic field. It couldn't do that. Part of it fragmented into D2 Earth core and became part of the elemental kingdom. And another part of it, because it had already passed through D4 from where the sphere was to get down here, another part of it had a little bit of the codes, but they didn't plug into each other. So it formed an astral self in D4 and an elemental self, a lower element of the human nature. So our souls got trapped in here. We could no longer put ourselves together and get out of here. There became a huge buildup of soul essences within the fourth dimensional astral planes and a huge buildup within the D2 elemental kingdoms. And this was something that was not intended to happen with our species, but it was all because DNA got unplugged, and it got unplugged because things were done to the morphogenetic fields that were in the sphere of Amenti. Okay. So there came a time when we had to be reseeded on the planet. The root races had to be reseeded again after the Electric Wars and everything. They had to, be re-put back here. Re-put back? That's not exactly a word. Okay, the reseeding, the second seeding, began about 3,700,000 years ago to about 848,000 years ago. And they managed to get root races 3 through 5 on the planet at that point. And there was a lot of hope put in for root race 5 because they were responsible for assembling strand 4. They already had the base codes for the 4th dimensional frequencies in their gene codes. If they could assemble all of the D4 gene code, they would be able to release the seal of Pleiador and at least allow the souls to go back into the morph field. They still couldn't ascend all the way up to Terra because of the Amenti seal, but at least they could make it back into their morph field where they weren't fragmenting into the elemental kingdom and into the astral plane. So a lot of hope was put in the 5th, which is the Aryan root race, and that's what we're a part of. But we weren't a part of the 2nd seeding. Of course, couldn't go that easy, right? Using paperwork here. Okay. After the 2nd seeding, about 1 million years ago, we had some extraterrestrial infiltration by a group called the Dracon. And they came in and they messed with the gene codes again. They created hybrids, and the hybrids were called Dracos, and the Dracos are actually messing with us right now. Again, they're working with the Zeta, and they're messing with us again. The Dracos were half human, half Dracon, and the Dracon looked like dragons, but they were intelligent and they walked upright, and they were from the Orion star system. So they came in and messed up our gene codes again. And there was a lot of hope, again, put in on this 5th root race. If it could evolve its strand, it could release that seal of Pleiador and let everybody return to the morph. But thanks to these guys, we didn't get to do that. They messed the gene code up totally again. The Elohim had to come in and unplug more of the gene codes, because if the beings, the people, the humans, who had the distortions from the Dracon genes, if they were allowed to stay connected to the morph field, they would contaminate the whole morph field, and the whole race would pick up the codes from the Dracon, and they had a very violent streak to their temperament, and they were not compatible with human codes. So the Elohim came in and they literally unplugged a bunch of our DNA strands, leaving only what we needed to survive. So we would have as little effect as possible on the morphogenetic field. And that created a very limited type of consciousness, the kind that we have now, unfortunately. Okay, now the big hope was to get this sphere of Amenti to be able to be plugged back into the Earth core, and to get the digression out of the races enough to where they could be allowed to be plugged back into the sphere. So this was the whole game plan here, and it was a game plan that took millions of years, basically. Okay. About 900,000 years ago, the Earth grid vibrated high enough to where the Elohim could return the sphere. And they decided that they wanted to, so they did. And right after that, they had a lot of resistance, again, from the Anunnaki, and also from a race of hybrids the Anunnaki created here by messing with our women, called the Nephilim. There ended up wars again. They called them the 1,000-year wars because they lasted for about 1,200 years between the Elohim, the Syrian Council, and the Pleiadians and the sympathizers on that side versus the Anunnaki and the Nephilim and several other groups. The 1,000-year wars were also sometimes called the Lucifer Rebellion, which you might see in some of the Pleiadian material. They talk about that. So then, this other problem happened. Okay, they had to again remove the sphere and put it in a safe place because the negative forces were trying to destroy it. They wanted to just destroy the sphere of Amenti. Then nobody down here could evolve, and too bad, we'll use them for our own purposes. And that would be that. That was what the Anunnaki had been trying to do to us all along. All right. So the Elohim and the Syrian Council, along with the Ra Confederacy from the Galactic Core, they moved the sphere into a secret place in the Andromeda Galaxy. And right after they removed it, every time they took the sphere out, major things happened on the planet. Okay, another huge flood came. This is our biblical flood. This is where all that, the stories come from, the Bible flood. There's actually 3 floods kind of squished into one story with the Bible flood, but this was another one, and it occurred because they had to take the sphere of Amenti out of the Earth core. Now, it was put in our galaxy, in the Andromeda, in the Andromeda Galaxy, but in our 3-dimensional universe, but it had a D5 seal put on it, which is a certain frequency code that meant energy could not enter it that didn't have a vibrational rate of D5 within its energy field. All right, so it was really off limits to most humans down here and their soul essences, because they couldn't get that kind of vibration with the genetic code they were working with. So they were all, we were in quarantine at that point. It was a genetic quarantine being done, orchestrated through our morphogenetic field, where we couldn't return to our morph field, we couldn't evolve, we were stuck in cycles of birth and death constantly, and there was no way to get out of it. We were trapped here. Okay, that's when something called the Ark of the Covenant came into being. And finally, we get to find out what in the world that was, because we've heard a lot of stories about it. Nobody really knew what its purpose was. They knew it housed power. They knew that power could be used for different things, but nobody knew where the power came from or what it was. Okay, the Ark of the Covenant was not referring to a boat, and it wasn't even referring to a box. It was referring to a portal that was created between the Andromeda galaxy, where the sphere of Amenti was placed, and certain portions of Earth. Now, it went through the Earth core, but there were also certain portals on the Earth structure that would lead into that where you could access it. It allowed certain beings, certain humans, that could have managed to pull in enough of the gene codes, the ones that had more of the pure strain left, because some of them had really digressed, some still had a little bit of the original coding left. It would allow them a chance, eventually, to move back up into the Ark and ascend back into the morphogenetic field. And, okay, there was a plan to the Ark of the Covenant. If you can picture the Ark of the Covenant as being like a big wormhole or a tunnel that led between Earth and the Andromeda galaxy where the sphere was, there was a seal put in the middle of that tunnel that resonated to D5. It would allow energy to come in from the morph field and incarnate, but unless you could resonate to D5 again, you couldn't go past that seal. You're stuck down here. Yeah. So there was a plan. It would take some time to orchestrate, but the plan was, once the Earth grid had started to vibrate high enough, by enough of the souls being brought down from the morph field and stuck here, eventually you're taking energy from one place, you're moving it to another place. This place is going to have less energy, and this place is going to have more. So the more energy you add here, the higher the grid was going to vibrate. Eventually, at a certain point, the grid here would vibrate high enough to hit that D5 security seal. And when it happened, when the grid speed hit that level, it would send a spark of blue light up into the seal, up through the passage, the Ark of the Covenant, and it would hit the seal and it would open it. And when that happened, I want to get this process right here so I don't goof up. All right. After the Earth sent its spark up into the Ark and opened it, then another spark of energy would be sent back down to the Earth, which would begin to download the morphogenetic field into the planetary core. So it would put the sphere back. Then after the sphere was added back into the planetary core, that would again raise the frequency of the planetary core. It would send another spark back up through the Ark of the Covenant, and it would spark it the second time. And on the second spark, the blue flame would be entered back into the planetary core in the sphere of Amenti, and the sphere of Amenti would open, and the halls of Amenti would open, which means the portals between here and Terra would open. Okay. It would mean that beings here, not all of them, but some of them, at certain points in the time cycles that it's involved in, would literally have the ability, if they could transmute their genetic code, to walk through these portals and end up on planet Terra. They wouldn't be stuck here anymore. Beings who didn't have a genetic code high enough to do it while they were in a body, they could drop the body, die, move into the morph field, and do it from there. And they could at least move into incarnational cycles or birth cycles in the Terran environment, which is done through budding. You don't have to pick parents and go through baby bodies and all that stuff up there like you do here. Okay, so it was a very exciting thing. The hoping for the Ark to get sparked, and the energy fields to open between them. First, the morphogenetic sphere of Amenti would be put back in, and then send the spark back up, and the next would be the blue flame, and the portals would open. This is why it's important. It doesn't matter what faith you're a part of, it doesn't matter what your spirituality is, even if you absolutely have none. You wouldn't be here in a human body if you didn't have a morphogenetic field, okay? It's a form-holding energy field. The morph fields are the key to understanding what our evolution is about. We need to pass through them in order to expand them and go beyond them, or we just become finite creatures. What it means to have the Ark sparked and to have the sphere of Amenti brought back to us and then activated with the staff of Amenti, the blue flame. It gives us the chance to transmute our body cells into light and to teleport onto Terra. And those of us who can't do that will have the conscious choice whether they'll stay in their body or not and stay in this time continuum, or if they don't want to stay in this time continuum, they can make the conscious choice of dropping their bodies. And I'm not talking about killing your body. You don't have to kill it. You just decide and you communicate with your soul level identity and say, I'm ready to go. I would like to leave. Just let me know when. You leave it up to your soul. You don't take that into your own hands. But when it's time for your body to be left here, your consciousness can go through those portals and you can remanifest in a new body form on Terra. Terra is the heaven that we have heard about in so many of our legends. It's the second world, the higher world. And it's not the last step in the passage home to our source or to Creator. There's several other harmonic universes you have to go through first to get there. But it's the next stop for us. I've had experiences that in the beginning I didn't know what they were. I would be taken by the guardians physically into these light fields. I'd feel myself go poof, and I knew I was turned into light. I could feel it. And then I'd be remanifest on the other side, walking around on what looked like some other planet. And they would never tell me where I was. It was like, where am I? Is this Saturn? I don't know where I am. And they finally explained to me that certain of the passages were beginning to open because the sphere of Amenti had been put back here in 1989. It hadn't been activated yet. The first spark had happened, and the Ark of the Covenant opened. It downloaded the sphere, but the grid hasn't adjusted enough yet, or hadn't, to send that second spark back up to where the flame could come back down. That's what's happening now. The second spark on the 26th of June. I believe they said at 3:46 p.m. They even gave the exact time. The spark was sent up, and the second seal on the Ark of the Covenant was opened, and the morphogenetic field of Terra is beginning to enter back into Earth's core. When that process is completed, the portals will be available to those who can pass through them. And that's what we're being trained now, is to understand the ascension process. And it's not some lofty spiritual term. It's a very scientific, energetic process that we're involved in here. It just so happens to save our souls while we're at it. So it's very significant. Yeah. What has happened on June 26th? We have been waiting for not only 800,000 years for this to happen since the covenant was set up. We've been waiting for about 5.5 million years. We've been waiting for the chance to be able to ascend into harmonic universe 2. Some of us haven't been waiting here in physical bodies. They've been stuck in the astral plane waiting. Some of them have been stuck in the elemental kingdom in D2 waiting. It has been a very long wait. I wish I could convey the excitement that I feel about knowing this. I mean, this may sound very strange to a lot of you, and it's a little difficult for me to try to explain it to you because there's so much technical stuff that I have to keep going back to the notes, and I'm still trying to learn what the energy dynamics are here, to where you can understand that this is a science that's taking place here, or something that's not just lofty and makes no sense. It makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. It's what we're a part of. We have an opportunity before us that is awesome. And that's why so much help has been coming through guardian groups, through all sorts of spiritual groups. They're all trying to prepare the people of this planet for what's happening. But very few groups have been given the information of exactly what is happening. For some reason, this group has been chosen for that. And we are to release the information, which is going to be done in the Voyager's book. But this is like celebration time on the soul levels. I hope I'm able to convey how important this is. Does anybody get it? Do you feel it? Because I'm at a loss for words at this point to try to explain it. So I'm just kind of like pushing energy at you so you can just get the feel of it. This is an ancient thing we've been waiting for, and we've incarnated over and over and over here in these cycles because we had no other choice. Finally, we have that choice. So. If you want, we can take maybe a 5-minute break, and I'll take questions at the end, and maybe more will come out of that. because I'm basically at the end of what I know how to teach right now. Not bad for 3 days. I got taught 3 days before. And I'm like, what am I teaching?
You certainly just load it right out of there.
I figured if I kept talking long enough, I wouldn't forget what I was trying to say and then keep going. So.
I can't imagine that you got that information and are able to flow with it like that in 3 days.
That was June 26th?
That's when they said. That's when they said it sparked.
Basically, she's only been working on this part of it for like 3 or 4
It's
days.
the second. It's so that spark opened up the seal. Yes.
That spark is sending the staff back in. It's activating the staff. That will not occur. Now I do have the dates here on this. Okay, it takes a bit of time once that seal is sparked for the second time for the blue flame to get put back in. It actually has to get put back in. It needs an escort. There's going to be a soul on the planet that moves into the Andromeda galaxy through its astral body, pulls the flame into its astral body, and then moves down through the Ark of the Covenant and puts it back in the sphere of Amenti. There are certain souls who are trained in this. They're called keepers of the flame. And they incarnate at different periods of time when things like this are going to have to be done. And so there are souls involved in this process that are going to be doing it. All right, what we can basically expect here, they said between December of 2010 and October of 2011, the flame will be returned to the sphere of Amenti in the center of the Earth's core, which means that's when the portals will start to open between here and Terra. So if any of us are interested in pursuing the path of ascension and getting the heck out of here, we have until these times to learn what that means and learn what we need to do with our cellular codes in our bodies in order to be able to pass through those portals. Or at least know that even if we can't get our bodies to go, we can take our consciousness once we die. So, I'm not preaching, let's die and go through the portals. No. Death is something you let your soul deal with. When it's time, you'll go. At certain levels of awareness, you become your soul, and you can say, okay, we're done, and just shut it down. You don't need to kill it, you just shut it off. But until you get that good, it's not your choice, So I'm not another Heaven's Gate. Basically, we're not saying anything like that. So we have these dates to look forward to. There's going to be a lot more information given on what this means, because once the seal on halls of Amenti are opened in our Earth core, there's going to be a huge influx of energy through our grid structure. It's going to be very, very important that we get our grid structure right now to vibrate as high and as fast as we can, because if that energy starts to push through and the grid is not vibrating really fast, it's not at the point, there's not so much difference in vibration where it would implode, but it could cause severe shifting of earth plates and tectonic plates, and it could cause a real mess as far as earth changes goes. We have a lot to say in how this will go. We need 8% of the people on the planet to bundle that strand, that Aryan strand of DNA that goes with the fourth dimensional frequencies. That'll raise the whole grid pattern, because we're all connected to the grid. What our energy is doing as a single body is directly connected to the energetic grid of the Earth. So each one of us directly affects how fast the grid speed will move. We need 8% of the population to get our energetic fields vibrating higher. It'll boost the Earths up enough, so hopefully we can avoid a lot of what could be a real mess climatic change-wise and earth changes-wise. So we're not innocent victims here if we happen to start seeing earthquakes and things we really don't want to deal with. First, we need to know, if we do see these things, we need to know why, so we don't feel like something's being inflicted on us and there's no purpose. We need to know that the Earth is trying to adjust to the portals being opened, and that no matter how bad it might get out here on the planet, it is worth it, because it gives us the chance to ascend. All right? Hopefully it won't be too bad. The Guardians won't tell me yet. I think they're trying to spare me. I just get the feeling. And plus they know I talk. Whenever they give me stuff, it goes right out and they give it to you. So they basically don't tell me anything they don't want everybody else to know about. So we have a lot of preparation to do, those of us who are willing to take this seriously. And that's what we would like to focus our groups on from now on. I'm not going to go into a let's prove this stuff is real type group. I'll leave that for other people. We're going to publish the stuff. Let other people deal with it. They'll have a good time with it. There's a lot of groups that will really bite into it scientifically and start to try to find meaning in that. And I've seen that already. Because chelantic science is the science of understanding the particles that create these energy patterns. It's the science of understanding morphogenetic fields. So when we learn Kilanta, we are learning to directly affect those energy systems. The scientist people are already getting interested in the science of Kilanta because they see that it makes sense in terms of physics. What they don't know yet is the next step in understanding Kilanta is understanding what's happening to our earth core and what that means to each one of us. So this is about all I can give tonight. And like I said, if you want to do questions and answers in a little bit, okay, but I could use a break. My voice is going.
Okay.
Excellent.